The farmhouse stood like a ghost on the edge of the French countryside, its walls pocked with the memory of shrapnel and decades of rain. Wooden beams sagged, their grain split and darkened by time, while shards of glass glimmered like frozen tears in the broken windows. Outside, the wind stirred the remnants of a scorched garden, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of old iron. As the historian stepped across the threshold, the floorboards groaned beneath his weight. Beneath one loose plank, a journal, thick with dust, seemed to pulse with a story waiting to be told. Dust motes hung in the slanting light of late afternoon, catching on the edges of the historian's jacket as he knelt beside the journal. The farmhouse had been abandoned since the war, silent, except for the distant cawing of corvids perched along the crumbling stone wall. Each creak of the floorboards echoed like a heartbeat in the empty rooms. He traced a finger along the journal's leather cover, feeling the faint embossing beneath the decades of grime. Then, as if guided by some unseen hand, a brittle envelope slipped free, tumbling to the floor with a whisper that seemed louder than it should be. The seal, yellowed and fragile, carried handwriting he didn't recognize, but the intimacy of the script stirred something deep within him, a pulse of fear, hope, and longing captured in ink. The items surrounding it, photographs, uniform patches, and stained trench maps, were fragments of a human life reduced to evidence. Each artifact breathed, in a quiet way, of absence. The historian's heart quickened. Here, in the remnants of a shattered home, lay not just a document, but a voice that had been buried for decades. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, almost impatiently, as if the past had waited long enough to speak. He carefully lifted the envelope, the paper flaking at the edges, revealing its interior without tearing it. The historian noted the date, 1943. A chill ran down his spine. The writing, precise yet quivering, suggested a young hand holding on to composure amid chaos. He imagined the owner, perhaps hunched in a trench, ink smudged by rain or mud, pouring heart and fear into these lines that never found their way home. A photograph slipped from the journal pages, faces blurred with age and dust, yet alive with an almost tangible presence. Every detail in the farmhouse whispered stories: a cracked teacup on the windowsill, a rusted spoon in the kitchen, a chair upturned as if abandoned mid-motion. Outside, the corvids scattered suddenly, startled by the historian's movements, their cries echoing across the ruins. The floorboards creaked again, and he could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, laughter, or sobs from decades past. Each artifact, each sound, tightened the knot of curiosity in his chest. This was no ordinary find. This was a life paused, a story waiting to reclaim the voice it had lost. His fingers lingered on the envelope. The moment felt suspended, charged with both reverence and unease. Here lay the threshold between past and present, a single letter capable of unraveling memories thought long buried. And yet, he hesitated, knowing that opening it might release truths that would never be the same again.
The historian unfolded the fragile letter with reverent care, its paper trembling like dry leaves in his hands. The ink, faded to a soft brown, curled at the edges where decades of neglect had crept in. Outside, the sky over the ruined farmhouse was heavy with the threat of rain, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and old wood. Each line of script seemed alive, each word carrying the tremor of a young soldier's heartbeat. As he read the first sentences, describing frostbitten mornings and the distant rumble of artillery, he felt transported into the mud-slick trenches of northern France, where every breath tasted of fear and hope. The letter was not just ink on paper. It was a lifeline. Emil's words painted mornings wrapped in frost, fingers numb from digging trenches, the meager warmth of shared rations, and the constant tension of listening for distant shell fire. He imagined him crouched in the mud, the cold seeping through woolen layers, his breath forming little clouds in the morning chill. Emil wrote of a comrade lost to a sudden barrage, the ache of absence mixing with the numbness of survival. Yet even amid terror, he found fleeting moments of humor, a whispered joke to lift morale, the camaraderie of men bonded by shared fear, mud, and hunger. And there was longing, aching, tender, almost unbearable, for the familiar comforts of home. Emil's words spoke of his mother's voice, the smell of her baking, the soft chords of his sister's piano, and the hope that love would survive the separation. Each line was weighted with vulnerability. Each pause in the narrative hinted at fear unspoken. The historian felt the letter's intimate pull, a reminder that history is not built only of dates and battles, but of human souls navigating chaos, longing to be seen, heard, and remembered. As the historian continued, the letter revealed more than daily hardships. It was a window into Emil's inner world. The young soldier's handwriting wavered at moments of doubt and despair, then steadied as he conjured images of home to bolster courage. He described nights when artillery fire shook the earth like a living beast, and mornings when frost crystallized across his coat, yet he pressed on, scribbling letters that might not reach the hands they were meant for. The historian could almost smell the trench mud, the bitter tang of rationed bread, and the faint, lingering scent of smoke from distant fires. Each word conjured not just scenes, but sensations, the press of cold steel, the ache of muscle from endless digging, the sound of birds daring to sing above the chaos, reminders that life continued despite destruction. Emil's fears were raw, the terror of sudden death, the loneliness of being far from those he loved, the moral weight of witnessing loss he could not prevent. Yet hope threaded through the narrative, a fragile, persistent flame. At one point, Emil wrote of a comrade's prank to lighten the mood, a shared joke about frozen boots and muddy socks, and the historian felt a smile tug at his lips. These small human moments, scattered amid despair, revealed the soldier's soul in ways official records never could. History had numbers, but letters had heartbeat. Then, midway through the letter, Emil's tone shifted. The words became purposeful, almost coded, as he described movements of his unit and subtle details of the enemy's position. He wrote not for his mother alone, but to preserve knowledge in a way that could later guide action, without betraying strategy to any unintended reader. The historian's pulse quickened. He realized that the letter was more than a personal confession. It carried intelligence born from necessity, interwoven with tender expressions of longing. Lines that had seemed innocuous about troop rotations or observations from the ridge suddenly carried double weight. Emil's care in phrasing revealed the duality of his existence, a son yearning for home and a soldier fulfilling duty amid uncertainty and terror. The historian traced each sentence, imagining the pressure on Emil's pen as shells shook the ground around him, imagining the decisions he weighed with every word. This realization brought a shiver. The letter was a bridge between two worlds, the intimate and the historical, the private and the strategic. Emil's voice, once trapped in mud and fear, now demanded attention. The historian felt as if he were not reading from a page, but listening to the soldier whisper across decades,
revealing both his humanity and the subtle heroism that could easily vanish into the fog of war. Outside, the farmhouse seemed to lean closer, the cawing of corvids punctuating the historian's awe-at-purpose letter, almost like applause for a life remembered at last. He closed his eyes and pictured Emil in the trenches, rain streaking his face, mud caked on his boots, writing feverishly by candlelight, words trembling yet precise. The letter had transported him into Emil's fear, hope, and fleeting joy, allowing him to experience history not as a record, but as living, breathing emotion. The farmhouse, silent except for the wind and distant birds, felt alive with memory. He placed the letter carefully on the table, fingers lingering on its edges. Every fold, every smudge, every wavering stroke was sacred testimony. Emil's voice, once muffled by time and circumstance, had emerged from the shadows of war. It was a reminder that the human heart had always endured, even when the world tried to silence it. And in this quiet moment, history felt profoundly personal.
The historian pored over faded documents in a small sunlit archive in the village hall. Dust clung to the corners of the room, the scent of aging paper mingling with the faint aroma of wood polish. Outside, children played along the cobblestone streets, unaware of the shadows of the past lying beneath their feet. A photograph of a young Emil, smiling awkwardly in his army uniform, lay atop a stack of service records. His eyes, though captured in black and white, held a curious warmth and determination. The historian traced the lines of the boy who had become a soldier, eager to reconstruct a life interrupted by war, but defined by courage and love. Emil Fischer had been 19 when he enlisted, a boy still learning the rhythms of life beyond his small French village. His mother had raised him alone after his father's early death, and their bond had been unbreakable, shaped by quiet evenings baking bread together and reading stories aloud by candlelight. The historian read letters Emil had sent before the letter unearthed in the farmhouse. Small, carefully written notes filled with innocent observations, the scent of rain on cobblestones, the laughter of his sister practicing piano, and dreams of a post-war future. Yet war intruded relentlessly. Official records described skirmishes, battalion movements, and casualty reports, but the letters revealed the man behind the statistics. Emil's courage shone not as heroism celebrated on banners, but as quiet resilience, comforting a frightened comrade, rationing his strength to protect the weak, laughing softly amid mud and gunfire. The historian imagined Emil under rain-slicked skies, pen in hand, longing to reach home while the world burned around him. Every page revealed vulnerability alongside bravery. Emil's humor, subtle and self-deprecating, surfaced in sketches of trench life or playful jabs at officers. He had lived in the fragile tension between hope and despair, and these letters captured the delicate balance of a young soul determined to survive, love, and remember what it meant to be human amid the chaos. Through interviews with elderly villagers, the historian unearthed more fragments, recollections of Emil as a boy, tall for his age, with a quiet determination and a fondness for storytelling. His mother, a resilient woman of modest means, had taught him the value of perseverance and compassion, lessons that shaped his conduct in the trenches. A neighbor recalled Emil racing his sister across the garden, both laughing until the rain soaked them to the bone, unaware that years later, similar laughter would be a memory he carried in the mud and blood of war. Military records painted Emil as meticulous and reliable, a soldier who anticipated danger, yet moved with caution and thoughtfulness. But it was the personal items that breathed life into history. a music score smudged with fingerprints, a fragment of a family photograph, a pressed flower from a spring before the invasion. Each object carried a piece of his humanity into the historian's hands. The historian felt a growing connection, a sense of walking alongside Emile through frostbitten mornings, late-night watches, and fleeting moments of camaraderie. He saw the tension in Emile's shoulders, the brief relief of shared jokes, and the ache of missing home. These glimpses transcended time, collapsing decades of absence into the immediacy of lived experience. Then came the letters hinting at Emile's inner turmoil, his doubts, his fear, and the quiet desperation to communicate with those he loved. One letter, written on a fragment of trench paper, revealed his anguish over a comrade's death, followed immediately by reflections on the sweetness of home, his mother's cooking, the rustle of piano keys, the warmth of a familiar chair. The historian realized that Emile's courage was inseparable from his humanity. It was a courage born not from glory, but from the insistence to care, to remember, and to survive while remaining fully human amid the chaos. The juxtaposition of battlefield horrors and domestic memory gave Emile's story profound emotional depth. He had become a bridge between worlds, the intimate safety of family and the relentless chaos of war. The historian traced the timeline of letters, imagining Emile writing by candlelight, rain dripping through cracks, fingers stiff with cold, yet determined to preserve love on paper. Through these reconstructions, Emile emerged not as a figure lost in statistics, but as a living presence, a son, a brother, a friend, a soldier caught between duty and devotion. Each discovery heightened the historian's sense of responsibility to honor him. The story no longer abstract, it demanded empathy, understanding, and the effort to preserve memory against the erasure of time. Sitting alone in the archive, the historian laid out Emile's letters and photographs like a fragile mosaic, piecing together a life interrupted by war, yet indelibly marked by love. He imagined Emile under gray skies, writing feverishly, each word a lifeline to home, each line a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Outside, the village moved on, children laughing, the sun casting golden light across cobblestones, unaware of the stories that lingered beneath their feet. The historian felt a quiet reverence. Emile's life, once obscured in the shadows of history, now shone through intimate fragments, letters, photographs, memories. Through careful reconstruction, Emile's voice lived again, bridging decades of silence. And in that silence, a promise lingered, that even a life disrupted by war could be remembered, cherished, and understood, one letter at a time.
The historian traced a map spread across his study, lines and pins marking troop movements and strategic positions from 1943. Outside, a gray November sky pressed low over the village, the wind rattling shutters and stirring dry leaves across cobblestones. Emile's letters lay beside the map, their edges curling like frozen waves. He traced the route of Emile's final unit, piecing together the chaos of retreat, bombed bridges, and disrupted communications. Somewhere along those muddy tracks, the letters meant for home had vanished. And yet, despite the absence, Emile's presence seemed to linger, whispering through the creases of paper, the faint stain of ink, the memories etched into maps and photographs. The historian imagined Emile on the move, trudging through mud-choked forests, the distant hum of artillery filling the air, each step weighed down by exhaustion and fear. Orders were scattered and shifting, bridges destroyed and roads riddled with the scars of conflict. Emile's final days were an intricate tangle of survival, courage, and fleeting hope.
The historian could see him in the rain, pen in hand during rare moments of stillness, scribbling lines that would never reach his mother, letters that carried fragments of love into the void. Through interviews with surviving villagers and records, a picture emerged, Emil as both soldier and human, quietly heroic, small acts of kindness punctuating the relentless rhythm of war. One elderly villager recounted how Emil had shared his meager rations with a younger recruit, shielding him from frostbite and despair. Another remembered him quietly repairing a neighbor's fence while on leave, a fleeting act that hinted at the gentle soul behind the uniform. The historian felt the weight of absence. Emil's letters were not just delayed, they had been lost in the chaos of history, leaving his mother unaware of the love, fears, and reassurances that had traveled with each carefully written line. History, he realized, was shaped as much by what never arrived as by what survived. The trail led the historian through a web of official records, maps, and testimonies. Emil's unit had been redeployed to a remote sector just before the intended posting of the letter. Bridges bombed, communication lines severed, and orders misdirected. The perfect storm of misfortune ensured the letter never reached its destination. Each discovery intensified the sense of inevitability, the fragile threads of human connection frayed by the mechanics of war. The historian pieced together small but illuminating details. A comrade who remembered Emil's quiet bravery, another who recalled how he had shared his last piece of bread or whispered words of encouragement amid shell fire. These were moments unrecorded in history books, yet they revealed the soul of a man caught between duty and tenderness. Emil's voice, muted for decades by circumstance, began to resonate through the historian's reconstruction. There was a poignancy in realizing that the absence of the letter did not diminish its significance. Rather, it amplified the human story behind it. The historian felt a connection not only to Emil, but to every life shaped by unseen, unrecorded acts. Proof that history is woven as much from absence and loss as from recorded events and triumphs. Outside, the wind rustled through skeletal trees, echoing the fragile persistence of memory. Then, an interview changed everything. A surviving comrade recounted a small, defining moment. During the chaotic retreat, Emil had shielded a local child from gunfire, carrying her to safety before rejoining his unit. The soldier remembered Emil's quiet insistence that every life, no matter how small, mattered. In that instant, the historian understood. Emil's legacy was not measured in victories or promotions, but in these understated acts of courage. This revelation reframed the letter entirely. No longer was it just a private correspondence. It became part of a broader story of humanity surviving amid war's brutality. Emil's words, which had been mislaid for decades, were not failures, but silent witnesses to resilience and moral conviction. The historian's heart swelled with both sorrow and awe, imagining Emil navigating the fog of war, clutching pen and paper while safeguarding not only his life, but fragments of life entrusted to him. The realization hit with quiet force. History is often defined by absence, yet even lost messages carry weight. The letter's misplacement had not erased Emil's voice, it had preserved it in suspense, waiting to be rediscovered. The historian traced the lines once more, imagining the young soldier under rain-lashed skies, the letter clutched in a pocket, unaware that decades later his story would finally reach the light. The historian closed his notebook, breathing in the faint mustiness of the archive. Emil's story had shifted from private longing to a testament of courage woven through the unseen threads of war. Outside, the village moved in quiet rhythms, unaware of the lives that had once intertwined with its streets. A faint smile tugged at the historian's lips as he imagined Emil, young and determined, walking past bombed-out bridges, pen in hand, heart full of hope for a mother who never knew the letter existed. History, he realized, is shaped not just by events, but by the lives that persist in absence. And in the delicate balance between loss and remembrance, Emil's courage endured, waiting patiently for the world to recognize it. The thread of fate had at last begun to unravel.
The historian sat at his desk, dimly lit by a flickering lamp, the yellowed envelope of Emil's letter spread open before him. Rain tapped softly against the windowpane, blending with the distant caw of corvids circling the old farmhouse walls. He traced each line with a finger, noting the familiar tremor of a young soldier's handwriting. But this time, something deeper drew his gaze. Small, almost imperceptible marks within the sentences, subtle deviations that suggested more than mere emotion. The letter felt alive, as though it had been waiting for someone to see beyond its surface, to uncover the secret Emil had buried within his words. At first, the historian had read Emil's letter as an intimate correspondence, a young man reaching out to his mother across the void of war. The ache of homesickness, the tremor of fear, and the warmth of fleeting joy had sufficed to capture his attention. Yet now something shifted. He noticed small anomalies. Certain phrases underlined faintly, specific words repeated, and subtle inconsistencies in the rhythm of the prose. It became clear that Emil's expressions of love, longing, and hope were carefully interwoven with coded information, hidden in plain sight. Emil's words were no longer just a record of emotion. They were a vessel of action. The historian imagined him crouched in a trench, candlelight flickering over trembling paper, aware that enemy eyes could fall upon these letters at any moment. Every choice of word was deliberate, a silent measure to convey vital intelligence while protecting those he loved. The stakes of his hidden narrative deepened. This was not just private longing, but an act of courage that blended intimacy with duty. The historian felt a rising tension, a shiver of awe at the duality of the soldier's existence. Emil's love and heroism were inseparable, entwined in a secret only patient eyes could discern decades later. Piece by piece, the historian decoded the subtle cues. References to village landmarks, seemingly casual observations of terrain, and cryptic mentions of daily routines revealed troop movements and enemy positions. Emil had managed to transmit intelligence that might prevent casualties, all within the comforting language of a son writing home. The juxtaposition of tender affection and clandestine strategy struck him profoundly. Emil's humor, his reminiscences of family, even the lament of missing home, all masked tactical insight that could save lives. The historian pictured Emil's trench. Mud-clogged boots, the cold biting through layers of wool, distant artillery shaking the earth, and the persistent hum of mortality in the air. In that crucible, he had written not only to comfort his mother, but to protect a community, a small French village, from complete destruction. Each word carried a dual weight, personal sentiment and silent heroism. The historian felt the gravity of this revelation. Emil had managed to preserve life, honor duty, and maintain his humanity in a world intent on erasing both. The letter became both a personal and historical artifact. It no longer belonged solely to a family. It belonged to the story of the village, the unrecorded acts of courage that had shaped survival, and the broader narrative of wartime heroism hidden in plain sight. The historian realized that the lost letter had inadvertently safeguarded Emil's secrets for decades, preserving their power until the right moment of discovery. Then, a breakthrough. Cross-referencing Emil's observations with military records and surviving witness accounts revealed the full impact of his hidden intelligence. The village, now peaceful and rebuilt, had been spared heavy bombardment due to subtle interventions prompted by Emil's covert guidance. Artillery positions were avoided, supply routes rerouted, and civilian lives preserved, all stemming from insights embedded in letters that had never reached home. Emil's personal farewell had unknowingly carried strategic significance. The historian felt a deep, almost spiritual reverence. Emil's private longing and coded heroism were intertwined, inseparable threads in the fabric of history. A young man, fearful yet determined, had acted with deliberate foresight while maintaining the emotional honesty of a son's letter. The implications were staggering. What seemed like lost words were a testament to courage, intellect, and empathy, hidden for decades but potent enough to have shaped lives quietly and decisively. In the flickering lamplight, the historian imagined Emile in the trenches, aware of danger, pen in hand, balancing intimacy and secrecy. He had written with purpose, hoping only that the world might someday understand. And now, finally, it could. The misplacement of the letter had not diminished its impact. It had preserved it, a hidden act of heroism waiting patiently for recognition. Emile's words, once private, now spoke with historical and moral resonance. The historian leaned back, letting the gravity of the discovery settle. Outside, the wind stirred the skeletal trees of the ruined farmhouse, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. Emile's letter, once a private expression of fear and love, had revealed itself as a quiet instrument of courage. Each carefully chosen word was a bridge between generations, a testament to the power of resilience and moral foresight. The historian gently refolded the letter, aware that Emile's secret had transcended decades. In his hand lay not only the voice of a son and soldier, but the proof that human courage often hides in plain sight, interwoven with ordinary acts of devotion. The letter, once lost, had found its purpose, and in doing so, had illuminated the enduring legacy of a young man who dared to love, hope, and protect even amid the chaos of war.
The village square, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, was alive with quiet anticipation. Wooden benches lined the cobblestones, now polished and restored after decades of neglect, while children's laughter echoed between the old stone buildings. Descendants of villagers, families once saved from the horrors of war, gathered, their faces curious, respectful, and expectant. The historian, holding Emile's yellowed letter, stepped onto the small stage erected at the square's center. The envelope, fragile yet potent, seemed to hum with life. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from nearby gardens, as if the village itself acknowledged the moment. Emile's words were finally about to speak. The historian unfolded the letter, feeling the creases between his fingers as though tracing decades of memory. He began to read aloud, each syllable a bridge across time. Emile's voice emerged from the paper, not just the trembling ink of a son longing for home, but the carefully hidden courage of a soldier whose small acts had saved lives. The words painted frost-bitten mornings, rationed bread, laughter shared in muddy trenches, and the ache of homesickness, yet threaded seamlessly with subtle instructions, coded intelligence, and quiet heroism. The crowd listened in hushed awe. Elderly villagers recognized landmarks and subtle references, connecting personal memory to historical preservation. Young children leaned forward, eyes wide, imagining a world of mud-slicked trenches and trembling hands clutching a letter that carried both hope and strategy. The historian's voice faltered at times, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of Emile's experience. Each phrase carried centuries of longing, bravery, and human connection, reminding listeners that history is not only made of battles, but of the lives, loves, and sacrifices entwined within them. The square felt suspended between past and present, the sunlight glowing softly, illuminating faces etched with emotion. Emile's voice, once trapped in secrecy, now resonated across generations, filling the air with the resonance of memory reclaimed. As the historian continued, Emile's words revealed not only fear and longing, but subtle glimpses of humor, tenderness, and moral courage. The crowd laughed quietly at moments of camaraderie described in the trenches, and sighed collectively at the heartbreak of loss. Emile's careful descriptions of routine and strategy, once hidden in plain sight, now resonated as quiet acts of heroism. The historian's voice became a conduit for history itself, carrying the weight of war, the intimacy of family, and the courage of ordinary men who acted with extraordinary resolve. The letter bridged time. The past pressed against the present, drawing listeners into the trenches, into the frozen mornings, and into the small victories that mattered more than any official record. Emil's life unfolded before them, a young man shaped by love and loss, carrying hope and courage across a world torn by conflict. The historian could see faces, young and old, shifting from curiosity to understanding, as the collective memory of heroism and human resilience settled quietly in the village square. The words, though decades old, felt immediate. They carried a pulse, a heartbeat, a reminder that even lost letters and forgotten voices can reach across time to teach, to comfort, and to inspire. Then came the final lines, delicate yet profound, describing Emil's longing for home, his love for his family, and his hope that those he protected would survive the chaos of war. The historian paused, letting silence fill the square. For a moment the letter transcended paper. It became a vessel of reflection, of gratitude, and of shared humanity. The villagers understood, intuitively, that Emil's courage had been quiet, almost invisible, yet its impact had been profound, rippling across generations in ways neither he nor his mother could have imagined. Eyes glistened with tears, and hands found one another, joined in unspoken acknowledgement of the sacrifices recorded in ink and memory. Emil's voice, once silenced by misfortune and circumstance, finally reached the hearts it was meant to touch, validating his life and acts of courage. The historian's own voice faltered, and he felt the weight of responsibility and privilege. He was not only reading a letter, he was restoring a life to history, granting Emil the recognition long denied by the cruel randomness of war. The crowd, in quiet reflection, became part of the narrative. The village, rebuilt and thriving, listened as a long-lost son spoke across decades, reminding them that love, bravery, and humanity persist, even when hidden, even when delayed. As the historian finished reading, a gentle breeze carried the echoes of Emil's words through the square. The villagers sat in silent reverence, absorbing the delicate blend of fear, love, and courage woven into the letter. Children glanced at the trees, imagining soldiers in muddy trenches, and elders remembered names and faces long whispered in stories. The historian carefully folded the letter, placing it back into its envelope, now a sacred artifact of memory and moral heroism. The sun dipped low, casting warm light across the cobblestones. Emil's voice, once trapped in paper, now resonated across generations. The historian smiled, understanding that even lost words, once rediscovered, have the power to bridge time, illuminate history, and remind the living that ordinary people, in the quietest of ways, can leave indelible marks on the world. History, he realized, was finally complete, not with dates or battles, but with the human heart preserved in ink.